Welcome back to Living with Pilonidal Cyst disease. If you're new here, my name is Ashley, and I started this podcast to share my personal experience living with pilonidal cyst disease. I want to say this right at the beginning. I am not a doctor or a medical professional, and everything I share on this podcast is based entirely on my own lived experience. If you're looking for medical advice, please speak with a healthcare professional. I originally started this podcast after seeing a Facebook post about pilonidal cyst disease because honestly, nobody talks about it, and once I shared my story, I had people reach out asking if I could turn this into a series so they could follow along, hear different perspectives, and feel less alone. I even had someone reach out with the idea of having guests share their journeys because everyone's experience with this disease is different and people develop it at different times in their lives. But before we get into guest stories, I wanted episode 2 to focus on understanding pilonidal cyst disease from my perspective. Experience-based education, not medical education. For me, my symptoms always started the same way. It began as this annoying pressure in what I thought was my tailbone. That's how I described it for the longest time, tailbone pain. At first it would come and go, so I didn't think much of it. But over time, that pressure turned into pain, and the pain turned into more pressure as the cyst grew. The area would get hot, red, and inflamed. It was clearly infected, and if you know what a cyst looks like, you can picture it. That's exactly what it looked like. Every flare-up followed the same pattern: pressure first, then pain, then redness, heat, swelling, and infection. As time went on, especially after my second cyst, I started noticing other symptoms. I began experiencing numbness in my legs, not just during flare-ups, but sometimes randomly. Even now after surgery, I still get that once in a while. After having cysts lanced and drained multiple times and dealing with scar tissue buildup, the nerves in that area were affected. Even though a lot of scar tissue was removed during surgery, the nerves were either damaged or cut. That's something people don't really talk about, the nerve-related symptoms that can linger even after treatment. The very first sign something was wrong was that tailbone pressure. At first it was easy to ignore, but eventually it became constant. Sitting, standing, walking, lying down, it didn't matter. I felt it all the time and it just kept getting worse. That's when I realized this wasn't normal and wasn't going away. This disease affected my life in more ways than I ever expected. Yes, the physical pain during flare-ups was intense, but the mental side was nonstop. I constantly worried about when the next flare-up would happen. I questioned whether certain activities would cause one. I had anxiety about sitting too long, moving the wrong way, or not following advice people gave me. It was always there in the back of my mind. My first flare-up happened right at the beginning of high school. I could barely go to school. Sitting, standing, walking, lying down, everything was uncomfortable. The second one happened in the middle of the summer. I was hot, uncomfortable, and the pain was worse than the first time, probably because of the scar tissue buildup from the first cyst. I could barely go to the bathroom. Even moving from sitting to standing was unbearable because of the pressure. Standing, sitting, lying down, walking, it all hurt, and it hurt worse than before. By the third cyst, I was just done. I was working at Canadian Tire, still in high school, and I wanted a life. I didn't want this to keep stopping me. I didn't want to keep putting everything on hold. So I pushed through the pain. I went to school, I went to work, I waited until it got bad enough. I remember working a 4 p.m. to 9 p.m. shift at Canadian Tire with one of my good friends, and afterward my mom picked me up and we went straight to Emerge to have it lanced and drained because I was just over putting my life on hold for every single cyst. That lance and drain was by far the worst one I have ever had. I truly believe it was because of how much scar tissue had built up from the first 2 cysts. This time, there was a resident doctor in the room with the attending doctor. He asked me if it was okay if she did the procedure instead of him, and I said yes because I genuinely believe in letting people learn. But she was barely cutting. She was going so slowly, and when you can feel absolutely everything, that's not something that can be done slowly. It has to be quick. At one point, I looked directly at the attending doctor and said, "You either need to do this or I'm going to do it myself." That was also the first time in my entire life that I have ever bit my mom, and I still feel bad about it to this day because I was in so much pain. And it was the same time I kicked the ER doctor in the face, not intentionally, but because my legs were flailing from how intense the pain was. That moment really showed me how much my body had already been through and how much trauma and scar tissue had built up over time. It hurt just as much as the other times, but mentally I handled it differently because I refused to let it control my life anymore. Surgery scared me a lot. I put it off for a long time, hoping it would just go away. Even after my third cyst, when I wasn't having flare-ups anymore, the pressure never fully left. Sitting or lying down for long periods still caused pain, and that wasn't normal. Eventually, I knew I had no choice. Emotionally, recovering from surgery took a long time. The cleft lift surgery changes your body, and that's just the reality of it. I've joked about it many times, but it's true. I literally have half the butt crack I used to. They pull the skin and create a flap, and your body looks different afterwards. I was 18 years old and I had to accept a permanent change to a very personal part of my body. It's sensitive, it's intimate, and it's something you'll eventually share with someone else. It still bothers me to this day, especially as we get closer to summer. Changing in front of people I've never changed in front of since my surgery makes me uncomfortable because I don't know how they'll react. And even with the same person I've been with for over 7 years, it can still feel awkward on certain days. I know I shouldn't feel uncomfortable, but it's a sensitive topic and in a sensitive area, and I think it's just going to take time to fully adjust. That's also something people don't talk about. Yes, I haven't had another cyst. Yes, I'm not in the same kind of pain. Yes, I can do things now I couldn't before, but it still changed my life. Just the other day, I was standing in the kitchen talking to my mom and my leg went numb. It hadn't happened in a while, but I immediately knew it was probably a nerve ending that's still sensitive. The scar itself is mostly scar tissue and it can be very sensitive. It's not the same pressure pain as before surgery, but it's a different kind of discomfort. This past summer, we went on a road trip. One way, I spent about 17 hours in the car, broken up over a couple days. On days where I sat for 9 or 10 hours, I noticed discomfort. Not severe pain, just discomfort from sitting that long. That's part of the after that nobody really prepares you for. I want to answer a few reflection questions that I think might help some people listening. So the first question is, what do you wish someone had told you before you had your first cyst? One thing that I wish someone had told me was that this was going to be one of the hardest and most challenging times in my life, but that it would pass. It wouldn't be forever, and I would build an insane pain tolerance that I never thought I would have, but I would get through it. The second question is, what was harder, the physical pain or the mental stress? During a flare-up, the physical pain, especially having a cyst lance, was by far the hardest thing. But afterward, the mental and emotional toll was just as hard, but in a completely different way. The third question is, did you ever feel dismissed because it's a hidden condition? Not by my own family, but by some medical professionals. It was often treated like no big deal, like it didn't hurt, and that became really frustrating. The fourth question is, what helped you emotionally? Talking about it, even with just my safe people, my family, my sister, my now fiance, and my close friends, and the Pilonidal Cyst support group on Facebook was huge for me. Being able to ask questions without feeling weird or embarrassed made a huge difference. The fifth question is, what would you tell someone considering surgery but scared? From my experience, don't be afraid. I built so much fear in my head, and it turned out to be one of the best decisions I have ever made. And my very last question is, what does healing mean to you now? Healing means it's done, it's over, and talking about it now through this podcast is helping me heal in ways I didn't expect. I still have some medical PTSD from having cyst lance, so healing isn't a straight line, but I'm getting there. I also want to share a few personal things that I did during flare-ups, not as advice, but just as my experience. I always used a heating pad or hot cloth because heat felt really comforting. I also did Epsom salt sitz baths multiple times a day. During my second and third cysts, my mom made a turmeric salve that I used on the area. I don't know if it helped medically, but it felt nice and cooling, and I used it consistently. I was on antibiotics a couple times, but they didn't work for me personally. Ultimately, nothing prevented my flare-ups, but these things helped me cope. I share all of this because pilonidal cyst disease is so much more than just a cyst. It's the beginning, it's the middle, and it's the after. It's the physical pain, mental stress, anxiety, body image, and long term adjustment. This was my experience. Everyone's journey is different. If you're listening and feel seen by any part of this, you are not alone, and I look forward to seeing you in episode 3.